We're starting with Zoom basics this week, and as you might have followed in the chat box, we're talking a little bit about Zoom over the next few weeks. There's a lot to learn about Zoom. There's lots of ins and outs, but once you do get started with Zoom, you'll have absolutely no problem with the interface at all. So today we really do start at the basics level, but I think there's something here for everyone. There's been a few changes since perhaps you've last used Zoom, so we'll take you through what those changes might look like. So we're going to start by having a look at the Zoom application window, the window you might not know that's there, but we'll show you what's there and how it's very useful. We'll then go into your Zoom meetings interface, which we call the dashboard. And we'll also look at the CSU Zoom portal, and this is on the website. Don't worry too much, you'll get to understand these terms. We'll have a look at how you can schedule your Zoom meetings from there. Then we'll take you through some of the key elements of understanding Zoom. So we'll talk a little bit about how to understand screen sharing. There are some key things here to learn, how you might go about recording your Zoom class and some of those differences in recording and what might work for you. A little bit about the i2 Zoom LTI tool, so how that works in your Interact2 site. Some of you might have seen it there, so we'll run you through that program. And then we'll just talk a little bit about getting organized, which we all do, and how that might help, and then some tips for running your first Zoom meeting. So there's quite a bit that we'll get through. And as you know, if you've been with us before, we always run to our 45-minute time slot, don't we, Lachlan? So we'll have no problems at all getting through.
45, I'm used 43, 42.
Absolutely. It's me that talks too much and takes us on for too long. So with that segue, take it away, Lachlan.
Thanks, Prue. No pressure. Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm going to ask for a little bit of forbearance from you this morning, as it's my first day back from leave. So I'm feeling a little rusty. However, we have run this session a number of times before, and we're constantly updating what's happening in this space. So as Prue has mentioned, Zoom is a bit of a movable feast in a way, because the way that the application works, the way the university implements it, and the tool set that we have access to evolves over time, and sometimes very, very quickly. Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Yeah. So look, Prue's given you sort of the rundown. I'm going to be taking you through the tool. And what I want to start with really is a look at some of the key terminology in and around the use of Zoom, because it's important that you understand these sort of key elements that people will refer to, particularly if you're getting help from DIT or other people and they start referring to things that you're not really across the terminology for. It can get a bit confusing. So we're going to have a look at that first. And what we're starting with is this thing called the Zoom application window. It's also referred to as the Zoom desktop client. Sometimes you hear people call it that other box. And if you're not sure what it is, there's a picture of it. I'm going to bring it up by clicking on the Zoom icon in my taskbar down the bottom. So this is the Zoom application window. So if anyone ever says, oh, go to your Zoom application window and do X, this is what they're talking about. So they're not talking about being in a Zoom meeting itself. They're talking about this other box that sits behind every Zoom meeting. And really, you open it up from your desktop. There'll be an icon there for Zoom. And once it is open, you'll be able to get it from down the bottom by clicking on the Zoom icon itself. And the application window itself is useful only for a couple of things, to be honest. We don't utilize this to its full potential because it has several features that we don't implement here. We use other programs for. So I'm going to talk about what we do use it for. And that is, it gives you a summary of Zoom meetings that you have access to over here on the right. So you get kind of this calendar rundown. Just because I happen to be added to subject sites where Zoom is running, I also see those in here as well. So you get sort of this summary view. Most importantly, up here in the top right-hand corner, you can see a tiny little picture. This is a profile picture of me. If I left click on it once, it'll bring up a menu, and I can change things like my profile. If I wanted to change my profile image, which I do, I don't know, every second week, really. You can ask Prue that one. But if you want to change your image that sits behind when you don't have your webcam on, that's where you do it. If you want to look at your settings, for example, for your video, for your audio, for your general settings, you can do it quickly from the application window. And arguably, from my point of view, the most important thing in here is this updates checker, because Zoom updates all the time. Most of the time, if there's a Zoom update, you won't really be impacted that much, but occasionally they'll release a really important one and potentially the application won't even open if you haven't updated. So just as an example, I don't want to scare people here, but a couple of sessions ago when we started using Zoom, we're in the middle of exams. Zoom released an update and the students hadn't updated, which meant they couldn't open Zoom, which meant they couldn't do their exams. So it's worst case scenario in that case, because they were invigilated exams through Zoom. And it was because they hadn't updated. Now we've managed to avoid that scenario since then and put in some measures to avoid it happening again. But this is for everybody else, where you check to make sure you're using the latest version of Zoom. You can't update whilst you're in a Zoom meeting, but otherwise it'll update very quickly and easily. So I'm going to click on it once now. It checks, and then it'll tell you either you're up to date or that you need to update. And you feel free to do that while we're in here in this meeting. It'll tell you if you need a new one, but it will be paused until you get out of this Zoom meeting, and then it'll do it automatically. So making sure you've got the latest version of Zoom is important, because you'll find there are features occasionally that you want to use that might not be available to you. So the application window, that's an important one to be across. So I'll just minimize that. If you do have any questions or commentary, etc., along the way, by all means, put it in the chat pod, and Prue will get to you, or myself if necessary. Okay, let's have a look at the Zoom interface. Now, I know a lot of people are relatively familiar with Zoom to some extent when they come to these meetings. They've used it before. If you're a first timer, that's fine as well. When we talk about the interface in Zoom, really what we're talking about is this dashboard that sits down the bottom to begin with, because that's our control over everything in the room. So what we're looking for is things like control over our audio, or over our microphones and speakers. You'll see an arrow next to it that will allow you to change the devices being used. Your video control for your webcams. So for me this morning, for example, I was shifting between the webcam that is on top of my screen, which is a little Microsoft Live Cam, and the webcam that's in my laptop, which is over here. If I switch that, I'm over there. So that's very easy to switch. If you can't get your video working, sometimes a quick fix is to switch to another device. You'll also find under that video section that there is options to change things like a virtual background and play around with video filters. We're not going to touch those today, but some people like playing with filters. And if you've got someone like Prue in the room and you'd like to see them with, a hat on and a moustache, there are ways for that to happen. So do play around with the filters. And you certainly can check your settings for your devices to see that they're operating. There you go. Prue has a shark face on. Thanks, Prue. All right. So that's playing around with filters if you're keen to do so. And your students undoubtedly will probably be keen on that as well. The security tab is not that important for us, to be honest, in these meetings, because the university sets benchmark security protocols to all Zoom accounts. So, I mean, you can click on it and have a look if you like, but those features are set institutionally. So things like the waiting room that we have on all of our meetings that allow us to make sure that people have logged into Zoom and into i2, for example, to make sure they're registered users. That's one way of preventing Zoom bombing. That's right, Scott. Yeah, absolutely. If it's a work laptop, it'll have the same setup, although you should still run your Zoom updates, because it might not have the most recent versions on them. And there's a quick summary here of what you allow your participants to do. So if you want to turn some of these off and on, you want everyone to be able to share or not share, chat or not chat, unmute themselves, all that kind of stuff. That level of control of classroom management, so to speak, is controllable through the security button. You can also kick people out of the room from here as well. So it's an interesting one, probably not going to be necessary a lot of the time for you, but you do have access to it. So I'll get into that question in a bit. about tutorial rooms or non-IVT rooms. It's a good question. And it's not that it's not allowed, it's that we can't run it from the computers in those rooms. We have to run it using a laptop or another device. And I can tell you why, but we might get into that towards the end of the session. You can absolutely change your background as well. There was a question there. Underneath your video settings, you will see next to video, change your background. So you can change it there. Okay, I'll keep going. If you click on the participants option, you're going to see a list of individuals in the room. I've got mine over here separate, but what I'm going to do is pop that out and bring it over so you can see it. So here's my participant view. And you'll notice in Zoom, when you look at your participant window, the people in charge of the room, the host, and potentially the co-host. If you hover your mouse against their names, you'll see options like mute and more. And if I click it, for example, as the host next to someone like Prue's name, because I'm the host, I've got options over that person. I can elevate their role to a host. I can take them away from being a co-host and make them a participant. I could change their name if I wanted to. I'm not sure why you would do that, but you could. You can do quite a lot. You can even turn off their video if you wanted to. So if it's important for you to do that and people haven't responded to maybe to requests to turn off video and things, you have that level of control through the participant pane. It's also searchable. So if you weren't sure where someone was, you could search for them and put in their name there. So we've got 35 people in this room. If I needed to quickly find someone, I could search for it. And you'll notice that under each of the participants, you can also send through requests through the participant box for them to turn off their mics. But you can see here, I can see everyone's got their mics muted in here. And the reason that that's on for me by default is because institutionally, our default setup is that when people enter our Zoom meetings, their microphone and their video are turned off. So it's an opt-in system. So for them to use those things, they need to turn them on, rather than people automatically being captured as soon as they come into the room with whatever they're saying, whatever they're wearing, whatever they're doing. It's opt-in, right? So by default, those devices are off, and then people make the choice to turn them on, and maybe you're communicating that to them. I know some academics, for example, want to see faces. Can everyone turn their, their cameras on, for example? And that's again part of classroom management, and it's up to you how you want that to run. Now, when you're the host as well, you'll also see 3 dots, and you'll see this as well with yours. With these windows that are popped out, you also have the option to merge them to the rest of your Zoom room. So if I click on these 3 dots, you can see that I have an option here to merge that box, and it puts it back alongside my chat box and my videos. So because I'm sharing my screen at the moment, you probably can't see that, but do play around with merging your chat and your participant windows and popping them out, because it's quite handy to move those things around at times if you need to. Okay, let's look at the chat window. I'll pop that out and bring it across. So here's my chat window. You guys can see it as well. And it's not a silly question at all, Yanni. That's a great question. Using cameras, streaming a video does use more bandwidth. It absolutely does. And we make assumptions about whether or not everyone's got access to the NBN or good internet, etc. But for every camera that's on, both yours and coming from the other direction, it uses more bandwidth. So the most is going to be from both directions, participants and the host, and the least will be all cameras off. Also, sharing a screen is streaming of video. So that's a 1/3 lot of bandwidth being used for sharing the screen, for using my webcam, for seeing your webcams. That's the most amount really of bandwidth we can use in Zoom. And if people are having trouble in their meetings with bandwidth, and you'll usually hear that because they'll talk about the audio chopping in and out, for example, it's because of bandwidth, and that's where you advise people to turn off their webcams, for example. If you can't see the chat window when you're sharing, you need to go across to these 3 dots up the top, and you'll see an option that says chat, and that'll bring up your chat window separately, and you'll be able to move it around and still see it. That's a good question, Rita. Good question. Okay, so in the chat window, apart from being able to type things, we can also share files. So for example, I have got a copy of the cheat sheet for today, and I've dragged it from my desktop folder straight into the chat box and shared the file. So it's really easy to share files. You can drag and drop, or you can click the file button and navigate to them and drop them in that way. Both work, and there's no restriction really on the type of file. Apart from the file size, I haven't seen anyone try and share anything bigger than 20 megabytes in here. So we generally keep it within reason. Obviously, any type of document or image is going to be fine as long as it's not massive. And if you're trying to share media, I suggest that you share a link in here rather than try and share a video file or an audio file. Share a link. So that's the file option. Again, there are 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner of the pod that allow me to do other things. As a host, these are the ones that I can see. I can save the chat. Everything that's happened in the chat, I can save it and get a copy of it right now as a text file. You also have the ability to turn that on in the back end of Zoom so that you automatically get it after every meeting recorded. Okay, we'll get to meeting recordings in a little bit, but you can either do it on the spot now and get everything up until now, or you can set it up in your own settings so that every Zoom meeting that you record, you get a copy of the chat file. So you can do both. Okay, your options, that control that we were talking about before under the security settings for the chat, you have the option to change it in here as well to decide who can talk to who. Now, this is a bit big brotherish for me, so it's generally everyone can talk to everyone in my meetings, but you may have it so that you don't want students talking to each other, for example, and you just want them being able to talk to you or everyone in the window. That's how you would set it to host only. Although most of the time, by default, it's on for everyone publicly. Okay. And then the last option that we have here is the option to merge the chat pod, like the participant pod, if you want it merged with all your other windows, because at the moment it's popped out, you can merge it by clicking that. So I'm going to do that now. If I wanted to send a private message to someone, so Prue, for example, I can do it up here in the corner. If I click on where it says everyone, pick the person you want to send that private message to, and say, you know, did you see Breaking Bad this week, for example? And only that person gets the message. You get a contact here, direct message, and no one else can see it. When you get a transcript saved to you, you do not get a copy of the direct messages. They're not part of the transcript file. There you go. Too busy watching The Office. I hope it's the American version, not the British version, Prue. Anyway. All right, so I'm going to now get rid of the chat and we'll move on. So hit the 3 dots, merge it, and it's joined my meeting window. All right, so we had a look at the chat window, we had a look at the participant window, and using the participant window to manage our participants. Okay, moving right along, I am aware of time and there is lots and lots to cover. So keep them coming. Prue, I might stop there for a second and see if there's anything that's been raised.
No, look, I think there's been a bit of a discussion just around bandwidth and students as well. And I think what's coming out of the chat box is that every group of students that we teach seems to have different needs. So it sounds like everyone's doing a great job of talking to their students and sort of finding out what their bandwidth is, if they're able to, or if they're having any problems in meetings, and just keeping that conversation going and having options if there's problems. So I think everyone's doing a great job.
Excellent. All right, I'll keep going. Okay, we're going to talk about the Zoom portal. We talked before about the application window or the desktop client. This is, we're going to be looking now at the Zoom portal, which is the website where CSU hosts Zoom. And this is the address, charlessturt.zoom.us. And there's a little snapshot there of the first screen that we're going to see. All right, so I'm going to bring it up. It's also referred to as the back end, the Zoom back end. So you might hear that term. So charlessturt.zoom.us. You'll notice that I'm moving my share bar around, which is a very useful thing to know about when you share a screen. If you get these 4 arrows up the top here, when you're sharing, you can move that bar around so that you can see things. So it's quite handy. Okay, so this is the Zoom portal, the Charles Sturt Zoom portal, the back end. We like to talk about this first before we look at our subject sites and how we use Zoom, because this is what sits behind everything. All right, most of the time, you're only really probably going to be using this, this first screen to click on sign in. Okay, if you're coming in here, and that will verify your CSU login. It takes your CSU user details, and you get access to your account in the back end of Zoom. Right, so on the left-hand side, you're going to see a navigation bar. You won't see this admin area because I have access to that, but you won't. But you will see this personal area. And the first thing that you'll see is a summary of your meetings, organized into those coming up, ones that you've had in the past, and I'm sure there are plenty in there. This thing called the personal meeting room, which most of us generally don't use, and I'll describe that in just a second. And don't worry about meeting templates. We won't get into that just yet. So this is the Zoom portal. It's important because it also gives you access to your profile again. Remember before when we were talking about the Zoom application window, I said that you could access your profile by clicking on your profile picture and changing settings here. This is a shortcut. All of this stuff is pointing to the back end here. So you could go into profile and change those settings in here as well, your image, your title details, etc. You can change all those things, but you can do it from the application window as well. The meetings tab on the left-hand side, as I said, gives you a list of those coming up, meetings coming up, the ones that you've had in the past. You also have the ability to schedule new meetings, to create new meetings. And we'll do that in just a second. We'll run through that process. The webinars function, most of you won't have access to. You can request access to a webinar if you want to use it. But to be honest, it's quite a specific use of Zoom. It removes quite a lot of the interaction features that we have in our meetings. And it's usually used for things like our town halls, etc. Or something that's purely presentation where you don't want the audience doing everything. Sorry, anything. So, you know, a webinar is an interesting term. It's usually used now for a one-way presentation. Okay, you also have a recordings tab, which means that after we finish recording meetings, they will be stored in the back end in the Zoom portal, and you'll see the title of the recording. You'll get a summary of when it happened, how many files, for example, there are associated with that. We'll have a look in that in just a moment. I might just grab a drink of water for a second before my voice cuts out. And over next to this, there's a column that says auto delete. And this is important because CSU has a setup for Zoom where every recording we make, as soon as it's made, a timer starts. And you have 365 days, 1 year, that recording will remain available in this back end. So every recording you make in Zoom stays live for a year. And then after that, it deletes itself automatically. You get a notification. I feel like it's 3 weeks in advance of that happening, 21 days. That you'll get an email that basically says this recording is going to be deleted in 3 weeks. So you do have the option to download it if you want to back it up, but otherwise, this is how we handle our the size of our account. The files, the recordings in Zoom will delete themselves in a year. That's how it works. If I click on any of these particular recordings, the title on the left, it will bring up a thumbnail that will allow me to view the recording if I needed to. I could change the name of the recording here. I can download all the files associated with this recording. So at the moment, those are listed underneath. I've got the video recording, which shows the share screen and the speaker view. We'll get into views in just a minute. I can get just the audio if I wanted the MP3 file. Sorry, it's an M4A file. It's a different type of audio. So there's, it amounts to the same thing. all audio players will play both. You've got MP3 files and M4A files. Maybe your car won't play an M4A file easily, but certainly they'll play on your computer without difficulty. And also I get a copy of the transcript as well, which means all the text that happened in the chat pod along the way in the meeting and the speaking is captured as part of the transcript. Okay, so those are the files I get access to, and I also have the ability to copy the link to the recording, which I could share with people. Now, there's a chat in there, something in the chat pod about, I saw something about Panopto. Prue, what was that about?
Yeah, Sarah's got a really good question there, just around how long. I'm thinking, Sarah, it's around how long our recordings are kept if we've recorded our lectures using Zoom instead of Panopto. If you
Yes,
that way,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. So I record my lectures using Zoom rather than Panopto because I find that just a minefield. So I'm just wondering, you know, how we can hang on to. Does Zoom delete? Like, are all those Zooms deleted? So do I have to redo my lectures, which I do anyway every year? But I'm just asking the question.
Look, it's a really good question. I suppose the reason that you know, the official line the uni has on Panopto versus Zoom, for example, is that Panopto CSU Replay is our lecture capture system. So hence you know, they're preserved there. It has a purge cycle as well that's meant to be 12 months. But it happens every 12 months, but they keep video that's 2 years or newer. That's officially what's meant to happen. However, the staff in DIT, for example, that perform that function, obviously in recent times, who's on board, who's not on board, etc., has changed. I'm putting things delicately, but basically, I'm not really sure who's taken on that function at this stage and what their timelines are like now. But that's why replay, you know, I guess is used for that. If you're using Zoom, it'll delete itself in a year. However, you could download the video and put it somewhere else, like a school YouTube channel, for example, would be an option. Absolutely. Yep. So that's, I've worked quite often with different schools in setting up a YouTube channel and putting content in there, because then it's not our problem in terms of storage caps. And you could then embed that video within your subject sites or whatever. And the link would never have to be updated because it's in YouTube. So it's not a Zoom problem. It's not a Panopto problem. We just get to put it in a service that is specifically for hosting it. So, yep, that would be my advice. If you've got resources that you want to keep using and that are valuable beyond 12 months, YouTube is a great option. Yeah, Jen, it's probably a good idea to drop me an email and I can help the school set up the YouTube account. Absolutely. And I think you'll find with nursing, for example, we've got one, and I can help you with the details for that as well. Some parts of education. Anyway, send me an email and I'll follow it up for you. Absolutely. Okay. So we've been looking at recordings and what we get. What I will point out over on the right-hand side here is that the file sizes for video are large. So if you're going to download a video of an hour, for example, you notice this one is 460 megabytes. Okay, that tells me straight away, if a video goes for an hour, if only one video is on, so the host, it's going to be about this big. It's going to be about 460 meg. If there's two-way video going on, so the host and the audience, it potentially could be double this. It starts to get very large. Again, another reason why we potentially want our videos to be stored on another service like YouTube, where we don't have to worry about storage caps. All right, so these are fine. We don't have to worry about the size whilst they're on Zoom for 1 year. That's how long it lasts. Otherwise, you may want to download a copy of that file for yourself in perpetuity. You might want to stick it on a hard drive or something to back up your resources. It's not a bad idea, but as far as Zoom's concerned, we get it for a year. Okay, so that's our recordings. When we do get a recording, however, quite often people want to make adjustments to the recording, or they ask us about editing. So I'm going to show you what the editor looks like, and I better find recordings that have actually been in rooms that I've made. rather than other subjects. So what have we got? Here we go. There's one here. Hopefully there's nothing too delicate in here. Right. If I click on this icon to play the thumbnail, to play the video, I'm going to do that. We wait for it to load. And there's Prue talking. Excellent. Thanks, Prue. I had a great break. So I'm playing this back. I can see the transcript happening here over on the right-hand side, but most importantly in my recording, I can see this pair of scissors that's over here in the little continuum over on the right-hand side. This is called the playback range, or editing the playback range. And the only editing that you can do in Zoom in cloud recordings is to determine where it starts and where it stops. That's it. So you might be used to using Panopto or other tools where you can make changes throughout the continuum, make crops. Zoom won't let you do that. Zoom will let you make a change to the beginning, where it starts and where it finishes. So if I was to click the playback range, I get these two handlebars at the start and at the finish, and I can drag that in right there. And so my video would start at 2 minutes 15. See, when I hover my mouse, the timer comes up, and I can drag the finish point back here to 52:58, for example, if I needed to, and then save. And anyone else who gets that link to watch that video would then see it from that start point to that finish point. So it's editing after a fashion, but not particularly useful beyond that. And if they download the video, it's going to be the full thing. It's not that cropped version, that start and finish point. So yeah, I mean, I to be honest, for myself, I don't do a lot of cropping. I just give them recording links. Let's call it authentic, if you will. But it's most of the time it's because people have either had periods of extended pauses in the recording that they don't want played, or they've said something that they didn't want captured in there. And again, remembering that if people download the file, and when you play back Zoom, you've got the option to download them all up here in the corner, they're going to get the full thing. Okay, so that's recording and editing in recording that we can do. In your settings, this is the last part I'm going to talk about in the interface. Yeah, it's more work. Absolutely, Rita. To be honest, I start the meeting in and around that time, and I finish it when I need to. But we'll talk about automatic recording as well, and how that might alleviate that problem, maybe. I've clicked on the settings. I'm in the CSU Zoom portal, charles.zoom.us. I've clicked on settings in the back end. There's a lot in here. I'm not going to go through them all. Okay, it's really important that you spend some time looking at these and scrolling down through this screen to have a look at your settings, because all of these options you can toggle on or off, and some of them will suit you, some of them won't. By default, they've been set up in a way that's meant to be as pragmatic as possible for educators here, but it's absolutely worth you going through here and having a look. And if we go through, you'll see things like whether or not you have waiting rooms on, whether or not you have passwords on your meetings, whether or not people can share video, not share video, the audio settings that people use. The defaults have been set up in the way that is most commonly used. So you won't need to change a lot of them, but some of them you may want to turn on. There's a setting in here, for example, that allows your participants to join before the host turns up. You may want that on or off. If you turn it on, you can then determine how many minutes before you turn up you want the participants to be able to join. So it's like, yeah, students can turn up, but only 5 minutes before I get there. That's quite particular, but you can do 5, 10, or 15 or any time. Okay, I noticed a question there. Can you preset to start 5 minutes past the hour and finish? No, so when you set the times for your Zoom meetings, when you schedule them, it's basically just a notification of when the meeting is set to start. It doesn't actually determine that the meeting comes into existence at that time. It's just really a signpost that says this is when that person said it was going to be on. So you could join it 2 days before and people could join it. You could join it 3 weeks after that time that you set up. It wouldn't matter. The link is still there and usable. It's more about whether or not you determine that people can join a meeting before or after. Okay, settings about the chat pod if you didn't want people to save, etc. So as I said, I can't really go into all of these today, but I think it's absolutely worthwhile that you take 5-10 minutes to have a look through your settings and decide what you want on and off, because there is so much in here. We do look more at some of these in the advanced session and the learning and teaching session, but what I'm going to say is you need to spend time going into the portal, log in, look at your settings, and have a look to make sure that the features that you want on are toggled on and the ones you don't are turned off, because they will apply to every meeting that you create. So having said that, I'm now going to create a meeting. I've gone back to my meetings tab. Over on the right-hand side, I've got the option here to schedule a meeting. So I'm going to get in there. Clicked on schedule. I get the option here to put in a title. Test meeting for PD. And don't worry about putting in a description. It's not visible anywhere. So I don't know what that feature is really there for people. So don't bother putting in a description. The topic is there. You can go back and change the topic later on. There's your time that you can set the meetings for. So if I wanted to set a meeting for next, I don't know, let's say tomorrow, 6 o'clock at night. So I can find 6 and PM. The duration, this isn't arbitrary. You can put this in by default, it'll come up as an hour, but the meeting will not turn off after an hour. It still goes. So that this duration business is a bit of a red herring. The time zone by default is going to be, okay, GMT. I still think of Eastern Standard Time, I guess, call me old fashioned, but it's our Eastern Seaboard type time. Then we've got whether or not it's a recurring meeting or not. So this is probably the most important part for you when you're setting up your meetings. If you're setting up for your weekly tutorial and you want to do all of them in one hit, you would check recurring meeting. I said every week it's going to happen 6 o'clock. So now I need to determine, because that's a Wednesday, recurring. Now I determine that recurrence. What does that look like? I don't want it to happen every day at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to change that to weekly. Every week, that's going to be on Wednesday. You'll see that's selected already because that was the date that I chose up here. Every week on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. How often do I want it to occur? Just for 1 week? Or lots and lots of weeks, for example? How many weeks gap do I want between? Well, I want it to recur every week on Wednesday. When do I want it to stop? So here you've got 2 options. You can put in an end date, find out when the end of session is, and put in the end date in there. And then it'll just run meetings up until that point, meeting these criterion. Or you could click the occurrences area and put in how many weeks it's going to run for. So this is usually the way I go about it. I put in, for example, how many weeks we have, teaching weeks. So if we turned around and said 14 as an example, I've set up those meetings. There's going to be 14 of them. We'll deal with the break in just a second. All those default settings I talked about are on. So the waiting room is on. Video is off for everybody until they turn it on. Audio is allowing them to use computer or telephone if they're going to dial in. My default is that people can join the link anytime, and that when they come into the meetings, they're muted and they opt in. I'm not automatically recording, although you could turn that on, which means that as soon as someone comes into the room, the recording comes on. This is a bit dangerous, and we do talk about it a bit more in some of our other Zoom sessions. So you need to be very considerate of turning on automatic recording, because it means that if you're not there and students are able to enter the room beforehand, whatever they're saying is being captured. And that's got potentially legal ramifications at that point because they haven't been alerted to the fact. Okay, so you need to be careful with automatic recording. If you're going to use it, make sure this is unchecked so that you have to be there first for the recordings to turn on. And the recording, if it's automatic, will turn off as soon as you leave the room. So it's useful, but you also need to understand the parameters. Okay. I don't really have a use for blocking entry to people from specific countries or regions, but maybe if you really dislike a country, I suppose that's how you would do it. You may want to add alternative hosts to the room, and that's done by putting in their CSU email address in here. So if I wanted Prue to be added to this room, I'd start typing in her CSU email address, and as long as they have a Zoom account, they're going to come up, and they are now added as an alternative host. If I click save, my meetings are now created. I get a summary. There's the meeting. It occurs every Wednesday, 14 times. And then it gives me the details of that meeting. I can come back in here and edit and change any of those settings if I needed to at any point, that's fine. But this is just a summary. If I click on meetings again over here on the left in the meetings tab, it will give me a full breakdown of those meetings. Here it is. There's the one for tomorrow. Then the next week, then the third week, etc., etc. Occurrence 1, 2, 3. And I can edit each of those if I need to, or I can edit all of them. When I click on edit, it'll say just this one or all of them, right? So you're able to actually make changes to those if you like. Remembering that I talked about the breaks. So if we know that the session break, for example, happens in week 6, and that happens to be, I'm guessing, but let's say, you know, for example, this one, in the 7th week, this is in the break, so it's no good to me. There can't be a meeting. I can just delete it at that point and take out that one. Delete this occurrence. So I can remove the break weeks if I need to. So we've been using the Zoom portal, charlessturt.zoom.us, to set up meetings. I'm now going to take you out of this, and I want to show you the way that Zoom has been set up in our subject sites, because I think it's really important that everyone's across that, because this is set up for all subject sites now. And this feature, so I'm jumping slides a little bit, sorry, Prue. This feature is called the Zoom LTI. So you may have seen online meeting Zoom LTI in your subject sites, and that's what we're going to look at now to kind of break down the difference between the two. We were looking at the back end, the portal. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like in your subject sites. So here I have a randomly selected subject, MGT 100. This is the last session, 2020-90, and they had online meeting Zoom LTI over here in the navigation bar. Hopefully, all of you will be able to see this in your subjects this session. When you click on it, it will automatically launch this tool. You get this message. And what that's doing is communicating with that Zoom backend that we were looking at before. The LTI is just a window into your account in the backend. But you'll see the view is a bit different. I still have the option to schedule meetings over here. So you can create them in here without having to go into the backend. And the setup is exactly the same. It will give a list to you and to the students in the subject and all other instructors, etc., in the subject of those meetings. After each of those Zoom meetings finishes, they will appear in this second tab, previous meetings. And we can see here, because it was a previous session, there are all the dates that those meetings happened. There were the topics. And there's also access to a report over on the right-hand side. And that report for instructors is your attendee list, who was there. So you actually get access to who was attending each of those meetings through this tool, through the previous. Yeah, it's a great feature, absolutely. So we get to see all the meetings coming up, and I'm going to show you a subject site for this session where someone has created all of their meetings. Once the date has passed, they'll move into the previous meetings column. And if we click on the cloud recordings tab at the end here, we can see all of the recordings that have happened through the session. So this is where the students go, one-stop shop. You don't have to give them any links. It's all here. So they can come in here, click on that recording link, and they get to watch the recording. If they wanted to just get the audio, for example, they can play back the audio and listen to it here. They can download the file if they need to, and they can also get hold of the chat file if they wanted that for some reason. But by and large, the main thing they're going to be looking for is the recording of the video and the audio file, and they get access to all of those. I will point out that you need to be comfortable using breadcrumbs. When I talk about breadcrumbs, I'm talking about these little menus that are at the top of these different areas. So I can't navigate. There's no back area that allows me to jump in and around this interface. I have to use these breadcrumbs to go back to different parts of the tool. Okay, so I'm still looking at the recording section. It's searchable. I can look for dates and topics if I need to. Students are able to download the files. It's all collected here for them. So if we go to a subject for this session, 2021-30, and I click on the Zoom link in the subject tab over here on the left. Maria, that's a really good question. I'll talk about passwords in a second, but the short answer for me is no, the waiting room will take care of that for you. So this is this session. The academic has actually scheduled all of their meetings for the session. And the students coming in here, once the host is in that meeting room at that time, will be able to click on join. I can see join because I'm an instructor in this site, so I can join that meeting room anytime, but the students will only be able to see join once we hit that time, once the meeting is actually ready. So Scott's question before about the setting of the times, it is valid in terms of when the students are able to see the join button. Okay, so they're not going to be able to see it until that set time is there. Pardon me. Okay, so the first meeting's happening obviously in 2 weeks when the session kicks off. After the time has passed, it'll move into previous meetings. After the recordings have happened, they'll appear in the cloud recordings tab. And to set these up, the academic has gone over here to schedule a new meeting. And they've gone through that same process that we did a minute ago, putting in the topic, putting in the time, deciding whether or not it was a recurring meeting and how often they're going to recur. And then you'll see that there are also the other options we have for setting up our meetings, whether or not we want a waiting room on or off, video, audio, etc. And here's the automatic recording option down here. You can change it to be on or off through this process as well. I'm going to stop here for a second because I know there's been a couple of questions. Prue, do you want to bring me up to speed?
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. There has been quite a busy chat box, and I think there's a great question that's come up a couple of times, and it's around setting up recurring meetings. So instead of setting up recurring meetings and going through the process of deciding which weeks they run, could we not just give the link to students and ask them to click on the link every week? What do you think, Kalache?
So there's two answers, I guess. One of them is, yeah, you can create a meeting and give the link to students. And then as long as you're there and they're there and they have access to that information, it's going to work. You can go into Zoom, they can go into Zoom. The LTI tool itself is there so that you don't have to manually provision that information. They don't have to search for where the link might be. You don't have to worry each week about, when things are happening, for example. Some people do both. Some people are sending out announcements every week saying to students, don't forget your online meeting this week, here's the link. Or reminding them to use the online meeting Zoom option in the nav bar. People double up like that as well. But this tool, the LTI tool, is there to take all the guesswork away, because it also acts as a timetable for students by showing the days, the times, the meetings, etc. It's a reminder for them of when they can access things. So yes, you can do it and manually provision it, but the tool's there also to alleviate some of that manual work. Next question.
We've had a couple of questions. Oh, you've answered the one around passcodes. Alan had a really great question that I think might be good to chat about, and that's just around participants. So does the Zoom LTI talk to your participant list in your i2 site? So how does it know who has what permissions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so the way that it works is the integration between Zoom and Blackboard is it looks at the subject site and says, right, student, 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 those people, it recognizes that they're students and will only show them what a participant in Zoom can see. So that means that they don't get the links to join the meetings until the time is ready. It detects that automatically. And for other full staff or instructors in the subject site, it detects that and they are added as a co-host automatically. So you don't have to provision co-hosts to your meetings through the LTI tool. Okay, it will pick it up automatically, and everyone else, just by logging into i2 and using the LTI, will be able to access the meetings either as students or as staff in the way that you intend. So I think it picks up on that relationship automatically. It's a very good question. Okay. I know that there'll be more, and I'm happy to hang around and address each of those. Just give me a second as we jump through some of the important stuff towards the end. I talked a little bit about recording meetings automatically. It's a very popular option, but you need to be careful about it, because if you're recording automatically, you need to turn off the ability to join before the host. You've got to be there, and technically you need to be telling the students, yes, this meeting is going to be recorded. It needs to be announced. I think you'll also find that institutionally, the university will introduce text somewhere in the coming weeks into all subject sites that will actually inform students that their Zoom meetings are likely to be recorded, right? So they're covering off on all their bases on telling people if you're going into Zoom, there's a good chance you're going to be recorded. Okay, there's an advanced option area down the bottom here. And really, you don't need to worry about it too much because it's dealing with things like scheduling on behalf of others. We talk about that in the advanced session next week. And it gives you a list of anyone who's an alternative host for the site. This is going to pick up on whoever those instructors are in the subject site. So you can see it's already detected who else in the site has instructor access, right? So it's picked it up already. You click save and it will already provision all those dates that we looked at. So I'll hit cancel. And as I said, the students are able to come in here and see all those dates. Okay, so that's the LTI in a nutshell. We do dive more into it next week, and I'm happy to talk about it at the end of this meeting with anyone who wants to stick around and ask specifics about the LTI as well. Let's have a look at all the things that I've missed jumping around. Screen sharing and recording. Okay, so this is important when we're using Zoom. Arguably, the most popular use of this tool is not only to get in here and turn your webcam on and start talking to people, but it's to share something and present it in the same way that all of these video conferencing tools generally do. We're looking for an option that says share. For us in Zoom, it'll say share screen, or if you're already sharing, up the top here, I can see my share bar, it says new share. So I can actually change from what I'm sharing currently to a new share as well. When we share our screen, it brings up this floating share toolbar that I'm dragging around. And you'll see when you move your mouse to the area underneath where the title is, you are screen sharing. I can drag that around by left clicking and dragging, and that's quite a handy feature. It also gives me a reminder of what else is going on. So there's a little recording picture, a little recording button there in a cloud. So it reminds me that it's being recorded. And I have the option to stop sharing here as well. Okay, so it allows me to get a brief view of my video and audio settings and others that we've been looking at. If I want to bring up my participant list, I can. If I want to run a poll, we look at polls next week. I can run it from here. I can share something new. I can pause sharing, or I can annotate, which turns on a pen and you can start scribbling all over the screen, so to speak. It takes a snapshot. Again, we play around a little bit more with those features in our learning and teaching sessions and the advanced session next week. Remote control, just to tell you what this is, if you've ever had someone in tech support take control of your screen and start controlling what's happening, that's what this remote control feature is. It will ask permission of someone else to come and start moving around things on the screen. Again, you're probably not going to use that function that much yourself. There's also 3 dots on the right with more options, and there are heaps more options. Do I want to bring up my chat box? Do I want to see reactions from the audience? No, polls can't be linked to the gradebook. It's not integrated at all to i2. Good question, Sashil. When we're using breakout rooms, again, we deal with breakouts in the advanced session. You can bring up a summary of them here. Starting and stopping recording, you've also got a shortcut to them here. Captioning, if you're using captioning, there's lots and lots of options that are available whilst you're sharing. You just need to know to look for them underneath the 3 dots. Okay. Breadcrumbs, sorry, the question when we were talking about breadcrumbs, that was referring to inside i2 or other applications using the menus that are at the top of the pages to jump between screens. So if there's no arrow in here that says back or an option that allows me to move around the interface, you have to use the titles up the top to get back to your subject site. So that's called a breadcrumb. Okay, so I want to get back to my i2 site. When I click on Zoom, I have to use the breadcrumbs. Okay, that's what it is. Sorry, that's a good question. Okay, so yeah, we play around with screen sharing more in next week's advanced session. With recording in Zoom, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and participants have the option to record, hosts have the option to record, unless you've turned off recording privileges in your control, in your security settings. Okay, so by default, it's on. People can click on record and decide whether or not to record to the cloud, so into the Zoom portal where you get a link, or to record to the computer where you get a large file sitting on your device. Okay, so that's recording. We already looked at this top and tailing, editing our recordings, how we can change the start and the finish point, and that recordings get deleted in a year. Right. Prue, I'm going to hand over to you and have a look at the chatbot for a bit. I know we're obviously running to time as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Why would anything be different for 2021-30? Yes, the chat box is quite busy, and I do apologize if I haven't got back to you. I will keep trying to respond to lots and lots of questions that we've got there. One of the things that you've probably seen about Zoom is it's a very, very flexible tool. It can do lots of things. It's just about becoming comfortable with what you want Zoom to do and what you want that final product to look like. And a lot of that is around getting organized, getting prepared for your Zoom session. So think about your PowerPoint slides. Is that what you're going to use? Will you be using Google Slides? Make sure if you are using your PowerPoint slides, just get used to what you're sharing. Have a look at what that might look like. Maybe record a session in Zoom so you can see what the students will be seeing. When you are sharing different types of sites, have a think about, again, what websites you might be sharing. So have you got a whole lot of tabs open that you'd rather not have open? Have you got any noisy applications or pop-ups? Can you put things on pause? So have you paused notifications in your Outlook or closed it down? Have you paused Slack or Skype or whatever else you might have going? You don't need those types of distractions. Have a think again about what's behind you. So have a think if you wanted to use those different types of filters or backgrounds. You can certainly download the CSU filters and backgrounds from the CSU templates website that we have. We've got some nice CSU ones. Think again about different types of microphones and speakers. Which ones are you using? Are you using the right one? I think a really good advice is to have a practice run in Zoom and record yourself just to see what you look like, what you sound like, what you're sharing, and sort of as you become familiar with the site. And also the final point there is knowing where your recording is being made and where it's going. So are you recording to the cloud or are you recording locally? Pros and cons to both of those. But if you are recording somewhere, make sure you know where that is so that you can share a link or share the recording with colleagues or students later on. So there's quite a few things to think through, but I think most people will find that they have their own best practice for Zoom and how they might like to continue to use that. So I know I've rushed through those getting organised tips, LK, but it's a very, very flexible tool with lots of different ways of doing things.
Prue, just
Yes.
one question. How can we schedule meeting using Zoom LTI if any subject has multiple classes or multiple lecturers for the same subject?
I can answer that
Yeah,
question,
that
Prue,
would
if
be
you like.
great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So the LTI is accessible and usable by any instructor and full staff member in the subject site. All of them will have access to schedule meetings within the LTI. So they're absolutely all able to create their own meetings in there. And to be honest, I would suggest it makes complete sense if you've got multiple lecturers to use the description or the topic area to put in, for example, descriptors that will help identify those. So that might be, for example, the name of the academic, whose group it is. They might be, for example, the name of a group, for example, that needs to use that meeting. So it could be, you know, a group or the academic or that you want the students to connect attending that session for, but all of the instructors will be able to use the LTI to add into that space. It's just that the students, when they look in here, are able to see all of the sessions that have been put into the LTI tool. That's why the topic is so important. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So if same lecturer is running multiple classes, then they will differentiate both lecture 1, lecture 2 like that. Yeah. And a student will
if that's
what will go to their specific lecture.
Yep, absolutely. If that's how you want to run it, you could use the topic title when you create the meeting to differentiate.
Yeah.
You know, if it's Monday lecture or Wednesday lecture or evening, whatever, put it in the topic to differentiate. It's the only way you can separate those, apart from the fact that the person who created it as the host is identified underneath.
Yep.
So that could also be useful for students to be able to see, that's Prue's lecture, for example.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. Look, we're going to hang around obviously for 5-10 minutes if people have got specific questions, but in the slides that we've provided today, you know, we've also dropped in the cheat sheet for teachers into the chat pod, and the slides from today, you're more than welcome to talk to Prue and myself, obviously, about use of the tool. But keep in mind, every session, we run 3 weeks of Zoom intensive sessions. And next Tuesdays is the advanced workshop, where we unpack more of the features and the tool set. We also have the learning and teaching focused workshop, which is more about engagement, etc. I'm going to copy the link to this YouTube clip which we've created for staff using Zoom. And we also have the cheat sheet, as I said, that we've dropped into the chat pod already. So you're more than welcome to any of those resources and to talk to us about the use of the tool if and when you need. But otherwise, have a great week. You've still got 2 weeks before we have to deal with all this stuff, hopefully, for most of you. So do reach out if you need help. But
Lachlan, it's Jan Manning. I just have one question, and
Sure.
you might address it next week. Can you show us what the students see with the new Zoom LTI link that they have in relation to how they see that the meetings have been set up for them on the I2 side? Are you able to show me that?
Yeah, I can.
Please.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump back into this law subject site for this session. I'm going to jump across into the student view. Yeah, let's do that. And now as a student, when I click on the LTI, you'll see that the meeting
Okay.
details come up, but no personal meeting tab.
Yep.
And the invitation, it's a really good question actually, because the invitation details for the meeting are also available. And the invitation is important, obviously, because it means that they get the details for dialing in. So if they want to dial in through their phone to the meetings rather than join
Okay.
over the web, they get that
Yep.
from here as well.
Okay. All right. Goodio. And then all they've got to do is click, if they're using their computer and they're on the I2 site, they can just click the join.
Absolutely. That's it.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for a really informative session again.
Yeah, you're most welcome. No
Okay.
problem at all.
Bye.
Bye. I'll stop the recording.